Hello, my fellow nocturnal historians. Dim the room, loosen the shoulders, and let the day drain away. Tonight we're not chasing kings or crowns. We're walking into a Highland glen where mist clings to the heather and a peat fire keeps its small red promises. We'll live a whole life inside one Scottish clan, through raids and hard winters, empty larders and full churches, where duty is a family name and survival is the everyday craft. If it feels restful, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I like to imagine these quiet journeys stitching candle to candle across the world. Breathe slower, let the wind on the hill become your breath. This is not battle, it's belonging. And belonging, like sleep, begins with a gentle settling. Before the cock remembers its duty, the house is already awake in small, kind ways. A peat fire keeps its red secrets. Wool blankets hold the shape of sleeping shoulders. From the byre beyond the wall comes the slow, patient thunder of cattle chewing last night into this morning. The room smells of smoke and milk and wet heather pinned up to dry. Someone hums, a lullaby that knows more verses than the singer does. You're born into sound, a prayer in Gaelic that belongs to your great-grandmother's mouth, the midwife's calm instructions, the kettle's breath. The first touch is lanolin slick wool, the second a palm that has built so many mornings it can build this one with its eyes closed. Your name is not chosen. It is found, pulled like a thread from a tangle of ancestors until it lies smooth. A saint's day nudges the choice. So does a story about an uncle who kept a bridge from sulking through a flood. When the name is said, the room agrees with it. Outside, mist braids the glen. The house is 2 rooms of certainty, a living room where the fire thinks, and a byre where cows turn grass into future. A wall of wattle remembers every winter. Rushes on the floor accept their work without speeches. The door is low because humility keeps heat. Kin arrive as if sent by the hill, an aunt with a jar of honey and the wisdom of where to put it. A cousin with the look of someone who knows how to fix a hinge in an argument. A foster mother not of blood but of promise. Because in this place, families are woven deliberately, not only grown. She ties a small ribbon to the cradle that says, without saying, "My hands are yours if ever you stumble." The pledge is old and useful. Children here often spend seasons in houses that are not their birthplaces, learn in other fires' habits, other stories' paths. It makes bridges you can walk later when the river is high. The clan is a ladder of care. Above, the chief, who carries the glen's face to outsiders and brings outsiders' weather back as gently as he can. Below him, tacksmen, kin with land to manage and quarrels to soften. Then tenants, cotters, herd boys and widows who are nobody's responsibility until everybody decides otherwise. What each owes is written in customs older than the ink. Labour at shearing, a cow at marriage, oats when the bin smiles wide enough. What each receives is written in the way doors open during thin years and how grief never eats alone. Baptism is a short walk and a long belonging. The Kirk stands like a thoughtful stone at the bend of the burn. Wet wool steams in pews. Beeswax remembers summer. The minister's voice has the patience of a man who reads aloud to stubborn weather. You're named again, this time in water that has met every shoulder in the valley. A godkin pair promises to hold you up in faith and, more practically, to scold you when your mother's hands are busy. On the way home, someone tucks a sliver of rowan into the lintel, not because they do not trust God, but because love enjoys having several kinds of rope. At the hearth, life starts telling you what it expects. Tools hang like old men listening. Creel, sickle, wool carders, a battered kettle with opinions. The elders teach lessons by handing you objects. A wooden spoon means stir patiently. A Porridge will find you if you don't chase it. A peat spade means cut square, let the bricks dry honest. Smoke is a sermon you can smell. A bit of twine means not this, and remember that most problems are a matter of joining the right ends. Courtesies are as practical as roofs. You learn to greet with a nod that leaves room for the other person's day. Never step over a tool, never mock a task you haven't done, never take the last piece unless you are the youngest or the oldest, in which case the rules are different and everyone pretends not to notice. The language is salted with proverbs that keep shape, even when memory frays. What's kept is worn. What's shared is mended. If the cow stumbles, help the cow. If the man stumbles, help the man louder. Seasons sketch their circle on the house. Spring lifts the door bar earlier each morning. Summer moves half the family to the shieling huts up on grass sweet as a hymn. There the air taste of time and rain that never learned manners. You drive the cattle carefully because cows remember unkindness longer than people. Milk foams into pails like a promise. Curds learn to be something more impressive with salt and patience. At night, the sky's a bowl you could drink, and stories are ladled from older mouths into younger ears until everyone sleeps with ancestors for pillows. Autumn returns you to the main house with cheese that smells like a field, and pride that smells like work. The chief's messenger might ride through, collecting news as if it were berries. Who lost a roof tile? Who mended a marriage? Who saw strange men on the south path? You answer with courtesy because one man's question becomes the glen's memory. Winter gathers the people closer. Floors creak in the agreeable way of elders. Hands learn mending's grammar. Through, over, under, back. Pull, but listen for the thread's complaint. Songs choose their older tunes. Children are told the stories that carry instructions folded inside. How to stack peat so it breathes. How to speak to a stranger who might be kin. How to lend and still have. Feasts and sorrows keep the calendar honest. Marriages set long tables that wobble cheerfully on uneven floors. Bread is blessed by 3 different people with 3 different styles of gratitude. A fiddle persuades feet to forgive their day. Funerals send a voice up the glen that every house answers in its own accent. Bread finds pockets. Hands find shoulders. Debts of kindness are paid forward without being counted. The clan's way of mourning is to fill work with gentleness until the rawest edge dulls enough to sleep. Children practice their futures quietly. A girl with her mother's hands learns to read wool the way some read weather. A boy with his father's temper learns to loan it to stubborn sheep and keep it from people. Tasks cross the lines when they must. A son watches an aunt trade at the tryst and discovers arithmetic hiding inside courtesy. A daughter walks fence with an uncle and learns the art of seeing trouble before it grows a name. Pride here is agricultural. It grows best when pruned. When disputes sprout, they are gardened before they turn to bramble. A boundary stone confused by frost. A borrowed tool not returned promptly. A calf that chose the wrong pasture. Elders sit, not as judges exactly, but as people who remember the last time this happened and how the weather was then. A hand on a shoulder, an apology rehearsed in private. A loaf sent ahead of an apology to soften the road. These are the tools. The chief is called only when the usual menders fail, which is rare, because needing the chief means the dispute has grown proud and pride is expensive. On certain evenings the byre door stands open just a little longer. Cows breathe out fog. Stars stitch a rough plaid overhead. Someone tells again the tale of the distant ancestor whose cleverness turned a raid into a feast by moving the cattle at dusk and inviting the raiders to chase what was already gone. Laughter knows precisely where to be loud and where to be kind. And all the while, kinship threads itself tighter. A girl calls an elder not by her name, but by the role the elder plays. Mamai, Mora, because function is honoured like blood. A boy sleeps in a neighbour's loft for a summer to learn their fire's language, and returns with a habit of saying please to doors. The clan becomes less a list of people, and more a way of being that each person carries like a tune they hum while working. One night, wind presses its face to the shutters to eavesdrop on contentment. The fire answers with a long red sentence. A new child dreams without language. An old man sleeps with a smile that remembers both a hard road and the soup at the end of it. The house makes a promise to itself in creaks and sighs, that tomorrow too will be built of small generosities and ordinary courage. The glen teaches everyone to carry, and soon to run. Morning here is not a time, it's a task list. The peat fire unshrugs from its ash blanket and remembers how to be read. Steam rides the porridge like a blessing you can eat. Cold water wakes hands until the knuckles turn the healthy pink of good intentions. Outside, the glen exhales a fine drizzle that coats every stone with honesty. The world smells of wet wool, wood smoke, sheep, and iron that slept rough. You learn the day by the tools you pick up. The creel on your back says hill work. The peat spade says patience. The sickle says keep your fingers. The scythe says keep your rhythm. A child begins with the safe end of everything. Pass this, hold that, watch me, listen. By 12, those same. Hands can braid a rope that will outlive a quarrel. Strips of field lie like narrow thoughts across the slope. Your families, the neighbours, your cousins, interleaved so no disaster belongs to one house alone. Ploughs bite into old grudges and make them useful. Oats are the clan's reliable friend. Barley visits when weather feels generous. Kale endures because kale has opinions stronger than wind. A man and a woman walk behind the plough as if behind a hope, steady, correcting, accepting that stones prefer the top of soil and must be convinced otherwise. Cattle are the clan's purse, choir, and weather forecaster. They read your tone better than your kin do. You move them low in winter, high in summer, along paths packed with the gossip of hooves. Transhumance is a long, polite argument with geography. In late spring, families peel off toward shielings, small huts where summer pasture waits like a note tucked in a book. Up there, the air tastes clean enough to embarrass you. Water talks louder. Grass is sweet as a hymn sung softly. Milk is morning's currency. You pour it into pails, coax curds from it with thyme and salt, shape rounds that will taste like a remembered hill come winter. At the shielings, work multiplies and simplifies at once. Lines of linen whisper themselves dry on heather roots. Butter-making becomes a lesson in endurance. Churn, pause, listen, churn more, sing, churn again, swear. There it is. Children take on the honour of keeping flames small and honest. Sparks talk nonsense. Smoke writes essays. Every pot learns your name. Night here is a bowl you can drink from. Stories carry across from bothies in pieces and recombine on your tongue. A cow that outsmarted a stream. A woman who spoke weather into sense. A fox that agreed to be reasonable for the price of a hen that was no good anyway. Wool begins as an itch and ends as status. Shearing days arrive with laughter and three kinds of shouting. Sheep disagree noisily. Blades nibble fleece into usefulness. You'll know a good shearer by the way the animal leaves, as if leaving a barber, not a battlefield. The lanolin in your hands makes everything else smell like work done well. After the clip, washing the fleece in the burn until it stops telling lies, carding it into clouds, spinning those clouds into thread with fingers that have learned patience from rivers. Dyeing is kitchen alchemy. Peat smoke, copper pot, lichens, heather tips, madder root begged from a peddler, a miracle from a recipe with no numbers. A good plaid says things about your house in colours the neighbouring valley can hear. Metal is the glen's quiet throb. The smithy breathes aside from the houses, half sanctum, half storm. The anvil keeps time, sparks bow. The smith's arm is law when iron needs a sermon. Nails, hinges, hooks, new shoes for old hooves, each piece a small prevention against later drama. You pay in coin when pride can afford it, in barter when it can't. Wool, cheese, a promise, written in the smith's good opinion of your family. Tools go home oiled, like guests who are fed properly. Trysts, the travelling markets, pull the glen outward in cautious greed. You walk with goods packed by someone who can count better than you, and with a list that will tolerate no improvisation. The road is a lecture in mud. At the market, tents bloom like mushrooms. Languages jostle. A pipe decides to be louder than sense. You trade wool for iron, cheese for salt, a story for a discount, courtesy for news. There's a way to ask a stranger where he's from without suggesting you're keeping score. There's a way to learn the price of cattle 3 valleys over without buying a fight with a man who thinks you doubted his arithmetic. You return with your creel a different shape than it left, and your head full of rumours that will be sorted by the kitchen tomorrow. Weather supervises everything. The wind from the west is a friend with blunt advice. From the north, a lawyer with a bill. Rain can be a cousin who stays too long, or a doctor who arrived just in time. You read the day by the way smoke walks off the roof, by how the dog chooses shade, by how swallows speak their bright shorthand over the pasture. When fog comes low and lazy, you revise plans. When it rises sudden as a pulled curtain, you run tools to shelter like children. Roofs are as important as prayers. Thatching is a theology of angles. Rye straw wants this pitch, heather wants that. Turf likes to be offended and then appeased. A good thatcher ties a knot the weather respects. A bad one teaches everyone new words and gives the minister fresh material for the next sermon on diligence. In a thin year you patch instead of replace. Patching is a skill, not a sin. Food is economy, chemistry, choreography. Oats into bannocks, oat cakes tucked against journeys, porridge into both children and arguments about the right way to stir. Kale becomes soup because soup is democracy. Everyone enters, everyone leaves improved. Fish means luck, salted fish means foresight. A stew can make a poor day honest if it sits long enough on a hearth and listens to advice from a carrot. The best meals are eaten standing because standing makes you less greedy. Children work like apprentices to tomorrow. A boy learns to balance a pail so the slosh forgives him. A girl learns to cast a heavy plaid in a wind that resents instruction. Both learn the topography of kindness, where to place a hand on a skittish calf, how to speak to a grieving neighbour in the language of chores offered without theatre. Everyone learns to stack peat so it breathes, to bank the fire so it doesn't sulk at dawn, to bless bread with a thumbprint not because you fear devils, but because gratitude likes evidence. Repairs are the glen's heartbeat between louder tasks, a gate hinge set with a gentle shim and a prayer to friction, a creel bottom rewoven while talk sharpens itself into memory, a loom mended with a sliver of bone and a joke good enough to keep it straight. In each fix is a refusal to allow small failures to grow ambitious. Courtesies govern commerce as much as kinship does. You bring more coin than you plan to spend because plans blush easily. You speak plain, both to the high and the low. Nothing ruins a bargain like a borrowed accent. When a neighbour's hay lies rained on and yours lies smug, you send arms anyway. You don't announce it. You just walk with a fork and a face that says this is obvious. The ledger in heaven, if there is one, likes tidy columns, but here we prefer debts paid forward until the original creditor forgets to be proud. There are jobs that look like nothing and hold everything together. Who keeps the path to the well-honest? Who reroutes runoff with a spade before it thinks to drown the lower field? Who tells newcomers which stones are actually stories with moss on? Who remembers which ewe hates which gate? Who notices when the minister's wife has lost weight and chooses to leave a loaf on a windowsill without teaching a lesson to go with it? The chief's work shows up sometimes as a horse at the door, sometimes as a letter waxed with a far city's seal. He will ask for men on a day when fields also ask. He will bring news of a levy that arrived dressed as law and left dressed as theft. The tacksman will soften it with a promise you want to believe, that if we stand like a plaid, tight woven, the wind will work harder for less mischief. You nod because a nod is not surrender. It's the Glen's way of saying we'll discuss this while stacking. When the herd returns in evening, a long brown sentence punctuated by horns, you read the day's success in their pace, and the way the dog chooses to boast or be modest. A good dog writes paragraphs with his tail and edits your pride when needed. The buyer takes the animals back into its warm grammar. You thank them for tomorrow's milk because they enjoy being thanked. The house becomes a brown gold lantern. Boots find the door scraper, hands find the basin, talk finds the part of the day that behaves in company. The loom takes up again with its wooden clack. A child reads a psalm half wrong and is corrected half kindly. A neighbour drops in for no reason everyone recognises. The air fills with the close harmonies of people who are tired together in the right way. Above the hearth hangs a targe, wood and hide, bossed dim with polish from hands that didn't fight today. It is both tool and warning, history and coat hook. You lay out tomorrow in small piles. Seed, cord, iron, courage. You measure the weather with your face at the door, and your palm to the lintel that has known your every height. The glen has work waiting in every green muscle of itself. You will meet it. You do not need to say so aloud. Your boots already voted. From far down the slope, a horn gives one plain note that fades before it finds a second. You feel it in the belly first, then in the palms. Someone lifts the targe from its nail and sets it on the chest with a thud like a period at the end of a sentence you didn't want to finish tonight. Steel can wait 5 breaths. You take them. But some accounts are settled with hoofbeats after dark. Night gathers the glen into fewer shapes. Hedge, wall, man, hill. Then the horn, one honest note that turns feet into decisions. Doors trim their light. Hands find what they always meant to. The targe comes down from its nail, straps tested by memory. A dirk slides where it belongs. The claymore waits like a sentence that starts with if. Muster is quiet choreography. The chief's word moves like a rope through many hands. Cousins to the right, tenants centre, swift lads on the flanks with eyes that hear. Old men count without seeming to. Women knock cloaks, shove bannocks into fists, kiss foreheads like blessings written fast. A reed torch finds its manners. The messenger finds his breath. The fiery cross runs the ridge. A splintered sign carried from door to door, not for terror but for time. Feet take the hill path that never forgets anyone. Knees consult the gradient. Lungs renegotiate old promises. At the cairn, places are taken not by pride but by usefulness. Shield front, polearm second. Bowman where the ground can think in straight lines. Weapons have weight and grammar. The targe teaches the left arm to be a door that swings only outward. The dirk is a last word you keep polite until required. The claymore, 2 hands, no lies. You practice the first 3 steps because after that the world usually decides for you. Breath in, heel down, guard high. Hold the line that keeps your neighbour a neighbour tomorrow. Feud has rules because men must live after they fight. No striking a man under truce, no burning what feeds children. Take cattle, not faces, leave a way for talk to return. Names are recited before blades are. This is who we are. This is who you are. Let us not make a new grief while chasing an old one. Mercy is reputation you can spend later. Lookouts blink rain from lashes. A peel tower pulls the dark a little closer so it can be understood. On the far slope, lamps move in a line too tidy for chance. The chief raises a hand, the hand lowers. The targe line breathes together. Not a charge, never waste a hill, but a steady come then that turns ground into ally. The first clash is wood on wood, hide on iron, men discovering they still believe in their legs. It passes as fast as weather. Shouts, a jolt, a push, a turning. Then the long discipline of not chasing. Cattle are turned. Ropes find horns. Boys become men by not running after the wrong thing. A fallen foe is named and lifted if breath is willing. Wounds wrapped, not counted. Your own cut finds you a moment later. Sting at the wrist. A wet warmth under plaid. It will have its boast tomorrow over soup. Tonight it has a rag and a laugh. Retreat is a craft. Backstep. Guard high. Watch the ditch. Listen for the sergeants. 2 notes that mean enough. No one sprints, no one straggles. The last man out is 3 men walking as one. Behind, the hill remembers nothing. Ahead, the glen receives what is still yours. Back at the cairn, roll call is a prayer disguised as numbers. 2 missing. 1 returns swearing at a stone. The other's name is said with a kind of silence that holds. Bread is broken open with shaking hands that pretend not to. Someone pours water as if it were wine, and it is. By dawn, the story has already softened its corners. Cattle in the byre, boys louder than injuries, the chief with mud up to his good intentions. A fiddle finds a tune humble enough for morning. The targe climbs back to its nail, still warm where your arm was. Steel passes, hunger stays. The porridge is stirred, the roof inspected, the field asked its daily question. Readiness returns to its small habits. Hedge cut low, path kept honest, watch set where talk likes to rest. Peace here is not the absence of enemies. It is the presence of neighbours who know what to do when the horn calls, and when it doesn't. Hunger does not arrive like raiders. It sends letters first, lean calves, a hush in the bee skep, oats that sulk under a sky that keeps changing its mind. The creel comes home lighter. The meal chest, once a stout, convincing box, begins to sound hollow when you set the ladle down. Wind threads itself through the thatch with opinions. You know the year is turning thin when porridge gets more conversation than salt. Bowls are filled a finger lower, then 2. Bannocks shrink to the size of promises. Children learn to drink slowly so the sound of supper lasts longer. Elders begin each meal with "I've eaten," which means take mine and don't argue. The rules of sharing tighten kindly. Labourers first, then the small, then the nursing, then the long ill, then those who keep the night watch. Pride eats last, if at all. Recipes acquire names they shouldn't. Hunger-broth, kale without, 7-stone stew. So called because stones weigh the pot into honesty. Nettles, sorrel, limp onions rescued from their own despair. Everything gets its sermon in the pot. You learn the alchemy of scraping without sounding desperate. A good cook can coax patience into flavour. A great one can make silence taste like gratitude. Work does not stop because bellies complain. If anything, it multiplies. Fences mended to keep cattle from making bad decisions. Roofs thatched tighter so smoke and heat cannot desert their posts. Peat cut in careful stacks that breathe but do not boast. Thin years are audits. Weak joints confess themselves. Lazy habits resign in public. Debts migrate from coin to kindness. A neighbour borrows a sack that you intended to give. You buy a calf you mean to return fat. Favours are tallied in quiet nods and extra hands at hay. No one asks for ink. The ledger would be embarrassed by how much it doesn't understand. You take to the shore when the sky allows it. Lines thrown into the grey. creels set where the burn mouths into the sea, a prayer on the lip that is mostly about weather pretending to be about fish. Salt becomes currency, and cure both. A barrel filled now is a winter calmed later. When the catch is poor, you fillet your voice until it gives only facts. Enough for soup, enough for tomorrow, not enough for boasting. Some leave, not forever, just along kin paths to other hearths where last season's luck stored itself properly. Children are packed like careful mail, a blanket, a spoon, a ribbon from a mother's hand, sent to an aunt with a garden that kept its promises, to a cousin whose cow remembered generosity. Fostering becomes Famine's softer face. Houses breathe a little easier and ache a lot harder. There is selling, and there is selling. You would sell a plaid before you'd sell a cow, a ring before a roof. Tools are lost, tools make food later. A tacksman, ashamed to be useful, whispers of a loan that pretends to be a gift until spring. The chief rides the glen like a weather vane with legs, begging grain from better valleys, trading favour for flour, setting aside dignity to make sure children chew. He returns with carts that clatter hope into the yard, and you bless him without making it theatrical. The Kirk's door grows a habit. Candles for the dead give way to candles for the living, lit with the same attentiveness. Bread is stacked where prayer usually sits. The minister's sermons turn practical. How to boil water when wood is stingy. How to avoid the sin of pretending you have enough when you do not. How to accept help like a man, which is to say without speeches. Confession lines are shorter. Counsel lines are long. Shame is gently shown the road. Singing fattens. You would think songs thin with larders, but no. Voices look for old shapes to stand in and find them where verses remember how to be strong. Lullabies work on adults as much as on babies. The rhythm of rowing, shearing, stacking, all the work songs with their patient hammers, return to the table and knock fear into smaller pieces. Stories choose their instructive clothes. The winter when the ford went wrong and the village went right. The girl who hid cheese in a hymn. The boy who learned to walk like a cow to bring home a cow that forgot which field fed it. Winter arrives official, a whiteness that edits the hill into simple grammar. Footprints write brief essays to the buyer and back. At night, the house tightens. Breath blooms and vanishes. Sleep becomes a compromise you keep for its kindness, not its luxury. Dreams fill with bread you would have shared anyway, and yet not everything shrinks. Mercy grows fat. You notice it in the way a neighbour splits his last onion before you ask, in the way the farrier shoes a mare for later, in the way children invent games that count everything except lack. The dog learns to find the person who needs leaning on and leans, on a day raw, enough to polish bones. A cart appears with a rattling belly and a driver who claims not to be cold. The sacks inside are labelled in 3 different hands. The flour tastes faintly of 2 different mills. It is enough to turn soup generous, to give bannocks back their shape. You eat, and the room discovers it can laugh again without being careful. The first lamb comes too early and tries to die out of habit. Hands rub life into it. A hearth adopts it. A child gives it a name that sounds like spring. The ewes remember hope. The air, still mean, considers being reasonable. A thaw begins like a rumour and then keeps its word. By the time the burn speaks in its old loud voice, you have a new list of promises. To stack peat higher, to plant a day sooner, to teach the children how to read a cloud's temper without flattery, to save a little more than comfort suggests. The meal chest no longer echoes. The porridge stops being a conversation and becomes breakfast again. When bodies weaken, souls gather. You learned who you are by who you fed and who fed you. You carry that forward the way the glen carries water, down every slope into every hand that needs it, quiet, patient, and always going home. Sunday begins with water. Not the holy kind yet, the useful kind. A basin set near the door, steam ghosting up, hands rinsed of sheep and soil so that prayer won't have to fight its way through lanolin. Children are scrubbed into shinier versions of themselves. Plaids are shaken. A best bonnet that has survived 5 winters is coaxed into believing it is still best. The fire is banked tenderly, so it will behave while everyone pretends to be solemn. The Kirk sits where the glen allows it, on a slight rise, stone-minded and plain, a bell that knows 3 songs: call, grief, and gratitude. Inside, pews polish themselves on the backs of generations. Beeswax carries a summer the sky cannot argue with. Wet wool steams into the rafters. The minister's voice is careful with its own strength, the way a man is careful with a good spade. Faith here is not a costume for Sunday. It is the thread that keeps weekday seams from opening. You can hear it in how people walk the path up the hill, not as to a performance, but as to an appointment they've kept since childhood with someone who understands weather, debt, cows, and tempers. A psalm rises that everyone knows by heart, and nearly by muscle. It has the old square edges you can lean on. The tune is slow enough to carry the tired and firm enough to lift the shy. Baptism brings the newest among you to the water that has met every shoulder in the valley. The child, slick with milk-fed sleep, is bounced once to remind it there's a world. The mother's mouth has the look of someone bargaining with worry and joy at a market only she can see. Names are spoken that are also inheritances: a saint to guard, a grandparent to honour, a lesson to live into. Water kisses a brow. A god-kin pair step forward. Kin by. Choice. And promise bread, scoldings, shelter and story, which is to say, a life that won't have to shout to be heard. The congregation hums assent, a sound like peat settling right on a good stack. Bands are read with the gentle pride of a neighbour pointing out a well-mended roof. 2 houses will soon share a table. 2 sets of cousins will learn new routes to each other's doors. Marriage here is not spectacle. It is logistics baptised. Sides are counted not to divide, but to plan. How many beds? How much barley? Which uncle knows a thatcher you can trust? Later, when the day comes, bread will multiply in hands that have been practising all week. Songs will argue merrily over the proper tempo. A fiddle will complain and then agree to be joyful. Burials bring a different song, but not a different people. The coffin moves at a human pace along the path everyone knows they'll take, some sooner, some later. Hats come off. Dogs fall in behind as if they understood the whole of it. Perhaps they do. At the kirkyard, wind minds its manners. Even rooks seem to lower their voices. The minister's words are brief and right-sized. Earth returns to earth with a sound that writes itself into your chest and stays there, like a remembered instruction. Keep your promises while you can. Afterwards, bread appears from pockets. A flask makes the rounds and doesn't brag about it. Hands that have milked cows and mended nets and held babies find each other with a competence that consoles. Between these stations of life, the calendar stands like a gate you pass through again and again. Candlemas light on dark mornings. A rogation walk around the fields to bless boundaries that pretend to wander. Saints' days that refuse to be tidy and therefore are exactly right for people. On certain days, a ribbon from a pilgrimage, real or imagined, comes out of a chest and is tied to a child's wrist, for safety, which means for love with a little superstition to keep it company. No one sees a conflict. God, being local as well as large, knows the shape of a rowan twig and understands why you keep one near the door. Confession, when offered, is not a theatre. The minister's chair is just a chair with a man in it who has heard worse and will hear better. Sins here are domestic, impatience that kicks like a winter calf. pride put on like a coat too often, coins kept too fondly, a tongue that found a sharper edge than it needed to. The penances are domestic too, bread delivered before dawn, a fence mended without being asked, a quarrel addressed with bread first and words after. Shriven, you step outside and find the sky changed in no particular way, and your heart changed in all the ones that matter. The Kirk is also the village desk. Notices pile like drift, but useful drift. A levy to be argued with, a road to be shouldered by neighbours, a cart needed next Tuesday for a widow who says she is fine and means it in the way people mean it when they are not. The minister is part bookkeeper, part weather vane, part shepherd of tempers. He knows who needs work disguised as charity, and who needs charity disguised as work. He remembers who preferred the fourth pew because it is near the draught, and who cannot hear but hates to be told so, and he adjusts the whole room accordingly. Feast days are logistics with candles, bread for the poor in portions that neither insult nor inflame. Candles counted and then counted again because light is both worship and safety, and wax is coin that burns. Children carry small tapers with the solemn peril of kings. Men carry platforms with saints who never learn to sit square. Women line the path with greenery so that feet can recognise celebration under them. Laughter is permitted, encouraged even, as long as it wears its good clothes. Private devotions thread through the public ones. A ribbon tied to a cradle with a whispered verse. A psalm recited over a sick sheep because the sheep belongs to a child and the child belongs to everyone. A blessing mumbled into bread dough, not because the dough needs it, but because the hands do. On market days, a tiny relic, bone, wood, stone, gets sewn into the hem of a garment where worry likes to loiter. It is a pebble of calm you can finger when prices go bold. The faithful calendar keeps the farming one honest. Fast days teach thrift in a language even children can understand. Vigils train patience, the kind that mends nets and tempers. Lent makes room in the larder for someone else's hunger. Advent teaches the art of wanting without sulking. After Easter, chores seem lighter, even if they are not, and after harvest Thanksgiving, even thin years feel, for one meal, like a feast sized properly for a human heart. Music carries more doctrine than sermon sometimes. You learn the creed by the way your grandmother fits harmony under a line that was already holding up a day. Work songs stack peat straighter and keep time with hammers. Lullabies preach against fear so softly fear dozes off. A love song or two, sung scandalously in season and modestly out of it, reminds the young that joy is also a vocation. Even the minister hums when he pretends not to. Pilgrimage, when life allows it, is as much local as long. Some walk to a well that has learned to heal simply by being consistent. Some to a ruined abbey where walls teach humility and stone teaches patience. A few travel far and return with a medal or a ribbon and a story that grows friendlier each time it's told. They do not become larger for the going. They become, if the pilgrimage took, more correctly sized to the world and therefore easier to live with. If faith has an appetite, it prefers ordinary food served regularly. Grace arrives disguised as soup on a neighbour's stoop, as a seat given up without announcement, as a cart turned quietly toward a field no one asked you to help with. The Glen's theology is this: love takes the shape of chores. You can argue, nuance on winter nights if you must, but by day you will be asked to carry, mend, lend, bless, and keep your voice kind at gates. Not all piety is tidy. There are men who wear holiness like a knife, and women who prefer God to keep his distance, unless he intends to help with laundry. Temper flares in the vestry, grudges linger in the shadow of the font. Someone sings too loudly out of a wish to be seen. These flaws are not proof of failure. They are proof that faith is being used daily. the way good boots scuff. The minister knows when to polish and when to let the leather remember each step. Evenings bring a softer chapel, the hearth. Heads bend not in performance, but because work makes you bow anyway. A short reading if someone's eyes aren't too tired, a longer silence if they are. Children say lines they learned begrudgingly and will keep gratefully when they're far from this door. A prayer for the living is folded into a prayer for the dead, because here we learned none of us is entirely one or the other. Memory keeps people useful long after hands have rested. Sometimes the bell sounds with an urgency that has nothing to do with feast or Sabbath. A fire in the thatch, a cow carving poorly, a messenger in from the sheriff with a paper that smells like rain and trouble. The Kirk becomes muster ground. Pews turn to benches for sorting thoughts. Elders gather with the exact attention they gave to psalms an hour ago. Faith flexes its practical muscle. Buckets, ropes, hands, decisions that do not wait for perfect consent. Prayer is not paused. It is put to work. And yet, for all its usefulness, faith keeps one luxury that famine cannot thin and war cannot tax, hope dressed as habit. The table is laid again, even when the larder argues. The bell is rung again, even when the sky sulks. The door is opened again, even when yesterday walked in with bad news. It is not stubbornness, it is memory wearing courage. The memory that, more often than not, you survived by doing together what none of you could have managed alone. On a rain-clean Sunday evening, the glen walks home down the same path it climbed in the morning. The bell gives one small sigh. A child carries back a stub of candle like a trophy. The minister lingers in the doorway long enough to be useful without being in the way. At the bend, the Kirk becomes background again, a dark shape the hill is proud to hold. Supper is modest and cheerful. Someone retells the baptism joke wrong and makes it better by accident. A boy practices a bow, to no one in particular in case he needs it at a wedding. A girl hums a psalm that learned to be a lullaby, and then a courage song, and will be all three when required. The fire writes its small red sermon. The dog, who believes in everything that smells like home, sleeps with one ear open in case Grace needs a guard. You bank the hearth and set the door bar with the liturgy of hands. Outside, stars take up their old stations and pretend to be new. Inside, breath evens, blankets settle, faith keeps watch the way hills do, quietly, massively, without asking to be noticed. And still the world beyond the glen presses in. Rain delivers the messenger before the messenger delivers the news. He arrives with a seal like a red berry on a thorn and a face that has practised not being blamed. The chief takes the letter the way a man takes weather, politely, without promising agreement. Wax breaks. Parchment unrolls its stiff intentions. Edicts have their own smell, ironed words, long travel, a desk that never met a muddy boot. The hall listens, not the people yet, the wood, the rushes, the joined beams. The letter says levy and assessment. It says peace in a tone that has never stacked peat. It suggests a count of cattle that will become, if history keeps behaving, fewer cattle in the byre. It presumes roads that are worse than the writer imagines and patience that is better. There is also a map. Maps are the way cities dream of hills. The chief's hand rests on the table as if feeling for the pulse of the glen through oak. He reads twice. Once with the pride that wants to argue. Once with the prudence that keeps widows from learning new nouns too soon. The tacksmen gather in a shape the room understands. Bread appears because bread helps numbers keep their temper. A lad is sent for the minister, who will translate law into weather and weather into plan. Politics here is not speeches, it is carpentry. Edges must fit without splinters. You measure 3 times, coin, labour, temper, then cut once, and keep your fingers. The levy cannot be refused without inviting a worse visitor. It cannot be paid without thinning the winter. So the chief does the thing chiefs are built for when glory is out buying ribbons. He trims and trades. One beast from 3 houses instead of 2. A promise to repair a bridge the crown forgot. A courier sent with a letter that says, with flowers braided through its teeth, "We are already doing the hard thing. Please do not ask us to do the impossible one as well." Then the clever work begins. Men who are nearly cousins become properly cousins by marriage, because a household with 2 cellars manages winter better than 2 houses with 1 each. A girl who is ready to wear a new name is asked, not forced, whether her heart can stand the plan. She says yes because the boy laughs with his eyes and stacks peat properly. A boy with a quick tongue is fostered for a season in a valley where his tongue must learn quiet. Diplomacy disguised as education. A widow whose roof argues with rain moves under another, and nobody uses the word charity. The word is sense. Laws from far away arrive wearing the wrong clothes. They talk about fences that don't exist and fields measured by dreams. The clan answers in the language of commitments that work. Boundary stones kept honest. A truce refreshed at the bridge by bread and salt. A meeting day agreed to that avoid Sabbath and shearing both. When a sheriff's man rides through and counts with his mouth. He finds order where he expects argument. He reports up the line that this glen is tidy. Tidy in such mouths is a blessing disguised as surprise. There is theft sometimes. Not the quick kind with blades and shouts. The slow kind with parchment. A hill that always belonged to your sheep finds itself drawn in different ink. The chief goes to argue with boots, not words. He brings a cousin who knows how to praise while refusing. A priest who remembers a burial done on that hill in a year the city has never heard of. A lad with eyes that miss nothing, and a face that offends no one. They bring a gift for the clerk that says, "We respect your desk. Please respect our dead." Often it works. When it doesn't, there are other maps, the kind made in kitchens with cups and crusts, and the sheep end up where they intended to all along, by routes that look like accidents. Not all pressure comes wearing seals. Traders arrive with prices that have put on muscle. Soldiers arrive with recruits in their pockets and kindness patched to their sleeves. Preachers arrive with fresh zeal for rearranging what the glen calls holy into something narrower. The clan receives each with hospitality and sieve. The trader gets tea and a long look at the wool that is miraculously worth only what you have decided it is worth. The soldier gets ale and boys who suddenly remember urgent chores. The preacher gets a pew, a respectful hearing, and a dinner table conversation that reminds him charity is a doctrine with chores attached. The chief keeps a second ledger that no one sees. In it are written names next to invisible debts. The smith who shod a mare, for later. The girl who stayed with a feverish neighbour 3 nights running. The old man who knows the paths smugglers prefer and chooses not to share them unless asked correctly. This ledger is paid in invitations and winter wood, in first cups and last portions, in the kind of praise that doesn't embarrass a pride that has done something right. When the Crown's ledger knocks, this one answers. Whether that senior partner continues to vote. A flood reproves a bridge. A drought teaches buckets to argue with wells. The glen attends class and takes notes. Raise the footings, deepen the spring. Plant the oat name for a saint who is good at endurance. After certain storms, the hill gives back things it borrowed. The tooth of a plough, a brooch, a memory. Reminding everyone that ownership is a conversation. War farther off beats its distant drum. The news arrives in 3 versions. The Crown's, a peddler's, and your cousin's neighbour's. None agree, so the glen adopts the policy that has always worked. Prepare quietly, boast never, and keep the cattle where hills confuse maps. The chief trains the lads a little harder under the excuse of sport. The minister preaches courage the way he preaches thrift, plainly without glamour. Mothers practice the art of looking at sons as if the world will not ask for them, and in case it does, as if the world will return them blessed. When hard men come looking for softer prey, they do not find it here. Paths are watched by people who pretend to be gathering herbs. Questions are answered with the kind of truth that leaves nothing useful behind. The byre-doors look ordinary but are smarter than they seem. A stranger who means well learns the names he should know in an afternoon. A stranger who doesn't wears out his welcome by the time the kettle boils. Through it all, the clan hides its treasure where tax cannot follow. In skills. A woman's hand that can turn a fleece into a plaid that sells itself. A boy's ear that can hear a horse lie. A man's eye that reads the burn's mood and builds banks accordingly. A grandmother's memory of a recipe that feeds 12 on the food for 6 and makes them think they have been favoured. Gold can be summoned by force. Competence must be courted. Kings know one, clans know the other. The Glen also invest in stories, not the idle kind, useful ones. A tale about the year of the long snow, in which the man who boasted lost his way and the quiet neighbour found 3 families with a lantern and a rope. A joke about the sheriff who measured sheep by shadow and left, pleased with his large number at noon. A parable no one calls a parable about a fence that learned its shape from the wind because the man mending it paid attention. Letters continue to arrive. Some are worse, some better. A tax forgiven on account of a flood that made even the city admit water is not loyal. A draft reduced because another valley shouted louder this time. An offer for timber that will help rebuild a ruined Kirk in a town most of you will never see. You send the wood because you would like someone, somewhere, to send bread to you someday when your flour remembers to be dust. Reciprocity is faith in work clothes. Outsiders sometimes wonder why clans endure. They imagine romance, or stubbornness, or ignorance that resists improvement. The answer is simpler, and altogether more difficult to counterfeit. Clans keep score in we. When a levy is paid, it is counted in who did not go hungry. When a raid is turned, it is counted in who slept unalarmed. When a law is obeyed, it is counted in how much dignity survived the obedience. When a law is bent gently where it was blind, it is counted in how much neighbourliness it preserved. Evenings, the chief walks the same ground he walked as a boy, hearing the field as if it were a court that remembers him kindly. He stops where the view widens and the road to the lowlands looks like a thread someone is pulling. He does the arithmetic of tomorrow with his eyes. Seed, men, temper, weather, what the city will want next, what the glen will permit. He comes home with a face that has practised not scaring children, and a laugh saved for when laughter earns its keep. The minister's bell keeps its 3 songs. The smith keeps his fire. The dogs keep their secrets about who needed leaning on. The women keep the recipes that keep the men from becoming speeches. The old men keep the benches from forgetting what good backs feel like. Children keep the paths polished between houses not their own. Everyone keeps the door unlatched as long as wisdom allows, and at last the day shrinks to the size of a house. Boots find their appointed muddiness by the door. Hands learn water again. Supper is not feast and never pretends. It is plenty enough to remind gratitude how to behave. Talk turns the letter from the crown into a tale small enough to shelve. A fiddle lifts a tune that says, without promising, we'll manage. Faces arrange themselves into resting. Someone sets tomorrow out on the table. Twine, seed, a whetstone, an extra cup. The fire preaches its old red sermon. The roof knots its soughing into sleep. A child asks for the 100th time where the clan lives after we die, and a grandmother answers, for the 100th time, in the work you do kindly, and in the bread you break fairly, which is enough doctrine for a lifetime and a good pillow. Outside, the glen puts on its night and stands guard the way hills do. quietly, adequately, without claiming applause. Through war, famine and faith, the clan's clever endurance is not magic. It is the patient art of choosing the next right small thing together. Fix the hinge, share the stew, keep the oath, mend the roof, teach the song. Crowns may write days in ink, but the glen writes nights in breath and kindness. Let the letter sleep on the table, let the peat keep steady company. Let your shoulders forget the map's demands. Breathe with the hill. You belong to a we that knows what to do when morning knocks and when it mercifully doesn't. Close your eyes. The clan keeps watch. Duty stays. And sleep, like kin, comes when called gently.